Hey everybody, welcome to Board Game Heaven. My name is Raymond, and in this video I'm going to take a look at Sins, which is a deck building game for 2 to 6 players depending on how many packs you actually add together. So these are the first 3 packs from the first season of the game, which was kickstarted, and this is the Rise of Wrath, the Ooze of Gluttony, and the Gloom of Greed. And there's currently a Kickstarter going on for the second season, which will have these 3 packs as well as 3 new ones for Sloth, Lust, and Envy. And there will also be a 7th sin, Pride, and there will also be an expansion pack with 3 new decks, all in a new nice big storage box. So you can check that out on Kickstarter if you're interested. You can also check out my unboxing of this first 3 set along with the collector's box by clicking the eye in the corner of this video, and there you can see what's inside of these boxes and also the art book and the playmats from the first season. And I'd like to thank Luudos Studios for sending these packs over to review. And right now I will teach you how to play the game, and then I'll give you my final thoughts. To set up the game, set aside the 20 Cosmos cards that are in each of these battle packs and deal each player 10 of these cards. That will be their draw pile. Then take all of the remaining card, which are the Sins cards, and give that deck a shuffle. Then to decide which player goes first, each player draws 1 card from the top of the deck, and then you check the number in the bottom left of that card, and this says A, which is the Wrath deck in this case. Every battle pack has its own letter. And this is card 2, there's 5 of them in this deck. And this is card 10, also 5 in the deck. So this is the higher card, so the person who drew this card gets to go first, and then those 2 cards are removed from the game. Then you take the top 5 cards of the market, which is called the Realm, and that will be the 5 cards that people can buy during the round. Every player draws the top 5 cards from their draw deck, and that will be their starting hand. So the first hand will always be 5 of these Cosmos cards. And if you decide to play up to 2 or even 3 dominance, you can use this dominance card and set it aside next to a spot that you reserve for your despair cards, and you can keep track of the dominance you get during the game with that card. Now you're ready to play? Let's explain the rules. Every battle pack in the game Sins will have a set of special cards with new rules to change up the game. So for example, in the Rise of Wrath deck, which is this deck I'm using here, there are special rules on the back of this card. It's called a module, and in this case 4 new Cosmos cards are added that do not have the generic white symbol but have these 4 colors on them, and they are explained here. So if you want to use those, the rules are explained on these cards, and every deck will have a different set of extra cards that you can optionally use if you're playing that deck. Now, to win the game, you need to get dominance over the other player, which you get by placing cards into their despair pile, which I will explain in a bit. And if after resolving the despair pile you have 5 or more despair, you gain 1 dominance and immediately win the game, unless you decide to play up to 2 or even 3 dominance. Now, before I explain all the rules, let's talk about the card's anatomy. So all of these cards have different symbols on them. The bottom symbol is your power, and this is basically your buying power in order to buy cards from the market or the realm, and your attack power, because you can also attack with your cards. The top icons are your weakness. So this is the cost of a card that's in the realm, so you have to pay these icons in order to buy it, but it's also used in defense. When someone is attacking you, you can play these cards in defense, and that will be your defensive value. And your weakness is also used to count the number of despair in your despair pile. So if you have several cards in your despair pile at some point of the game, and the opponent decides to resolve that despair pile, you flip over all of those cards and you count up the number of weakness you have in total, and if that total is 5 or more, that player gains 1 dominance over you. This text is the card's effect. You simply read it and do what it says. And every card also has a couple of tags. So in this case, this is a pride card and it's an undead card. This is an envy card, which is also a spirit. And this is a gluttony card, which is also a beast card. And sometimes those terms are referred to in some of these effects. Every card also has a name. In the first edition, it's printed on the bottom here. In the second edition, the name will be bigger and printed in the middle here over these tags. And lastly, every card has its deck letter and its number and the amount of that card that's in the deck printed on the bottom left. So your power and your weakness is indicated by these colored symbols, and there's 5 different ones that are explained on this reference card. The pink one is Canva, the blue one is Viscous, the orange one is Ignis, the green one is Terra, and the white circle is Omnis, which is basically the wild card and can be used for any of the other colors. Now a turn has 4 phases, which are explained on this reference card. There's the status phase, the buy phase, the attack phase, and the refresh phase. So I'll explain all of those one by one. During the status phase, the active player may choose to resolve the despair pile of the player to their left. So in a 2-player game, that's always the other player. In a multiplayer game, it's always the player to your left. And of course, during your first turn, you won't have any despair, so you can skip that phase. But in a later phase, you may have some cards in your despair pile. And then the other player, so the player on the right of this player, if that is the active player, they can choose to resolve. So what happens then is that the player to the left of the active player simply reveals all the cards in their despair pile and count up the weakness in those cards. So this has just simply 1 weakness. This card has 3, so that's 4. This is a Cosmos card. They have no weakness, so it's still 4. And the final card here has 2 weakness. So that makes a total of 6. So if at any time this is 5 or more, then the active player scores 1 dominance over the player to their left. So you can rotate this card to indicate that. Normally, that would be the end of the game and the active player wins. But if you're playing best out of 3 or simply up to a higher number, then play continues and all the cards from the despair pile are removed from the game, no matter if they reached 5 or not. During the second phase, which is the buy phase, you first refill any cards of the realm that have been removed previously. So if somebody else had bought a card and this one would be gone, then at this step in your turn, you refill the realm. Then you can gain cards, simply buying cards from the realm by playing cards from your hand. And whether you play a card to buy something or simply for its effect is entirely up to you. Since Cosmos cards don't have any effect, they're simply used to buy in this case. So I've got a generic icon here, so I can use that for any of those colors, but I have to match the amount as well. So in this case, if I wanted this card, I'd need 2 of those icons, so I'd have to play 2 of these Cosmos cards to buy this one. I could also buy this card or that card with these cards. But if later in the game I have some other cards in my hand and I play those, then these need to match the card that I'm buying. So for these 2 cards, I could only buy this Pride card. So Cosmos cards are basically universal cards, and the Omnis symbol can be used to buy anything. Any cards you buy end up in your discard pile. So in this case, I could also decide to use these 3 cards to buy this card, for example, which also has 3 weakness. I put that in my discard pile. And like I said, I can also choose to trigger any effects that I have on my cards. So again, if I had other cards on my hand and I use them, I don't necessarily have to use them to buy something. I can also just play them for their effect. And you can also do that in any order. I can play cards, buy a card, play more cards, use their effects, buy more cards, because using an effect from a card still means I can also use its power to buy something. So then at the end of the buy phase, I can discard. So if I still had cards in my hand, for example, I had still some cards left that I don't find very useful, then I can choose to still simply discard those cards if I don't want to play them or use them for their power to buy something. And then all of the cards that I used and cards that I had on my hand that I don't want to keep are also placed in the discard pile. You can also always substitute 2 powers for any other power during the buy phase. So if I don't have a certain color, then I can use 2 others to match 1 other symbol. The third phase on your turn is the attack phase. And if you have any cards left in your hand, you can use those to attack. You can attack any player. So if you're playing more than 2 players, you can attack anyone at the table. And let's say, for example, that this was still my hand. I hadn't bought anything this turn. I just had these cards in my hand. Then I could say, okay, I'm going to attack. And then you choose which card to play. You play them one by one. So after I declare my attack and point out my opponent, then I could say, okay, I'm going to play this card. And that, the power, is also my attack power. Then I play the card and I can again choose to trigger its effect if I want to. And then the defending player can choose to play a card from their hand to defend, or they can pass. But if you pass, that means you cannot play any more cards during that attack phase. So let's say, for example, the other player has some cards on their hand. Let's just say these are their cards. And I'm attacking with this orange power, which is Ignis. Then the opposing player can choose to defend that Ignis either with a card that has the same color weakness, which this one has, and it has 3 of them even, or they could block with a card that has the Omnis weakness. So let's say, for example, that player is playing this card in defense. So that will be on their side of the table. So I'm just gonna put it here for now. Then it's back to the active player, so they can choose to continue attacking or stop, in which case nothing happens. But if they continue to attack, they could attack with this card if they thought that the effect on the card was useful, because if they would play this card in attack, it would be another Ignis power, which is already blocked by this card, which has 3 Ignis weakness. So it could block up to 3 Ignis cards, or even some of these Omnis cards. So this player is not going to play this in attack, but they might play this one and use its power, destroy a card in your hand to draw a card. So they might think, I don't want this one, so to destroy that, it gets removed from the game, and then they draw a card. And it's a Cosmos card, which they can use to attack, but it has no effects and is easily blocked. One thing is important to mention, and that is that you cannot start an attack or a struggle with a Cosmos card, but you can use it after having played another card. And while a basic Cosmos card does not have a weakness, you can still play it in defense if you do not want to pass. But first, of course, after playing this card to attack, the other player has to block or has to play a card again, otherwise they should pass, and then the attacking player can play as many cards as they want. So this player might think, well, I can easily block this still with this card, and they only have 2 more cards on their hand, so I might risk it, or I might try and play it safe, and perhaps they also have this card and they play this in defense, which has an Omnis weakness, so that could block any other color that I might still play. So then it's back to the active player, and that player might see, well, playing this one in attack is pointless because this one would simply be blocked together with these two by that card or even by that card, but playing a different color power would also simply result in these two being blocked by that card and this one being blocked by this Omnis weakness. And since I don't have any other colors to attack with, that means that I could just as well just keep these cards unless I want to play the effect on this card. But I don't currently have any cards in my despair pile, so I can't actually trigger this ability. So unless there's any kind of special ability that would still help me stay in the match, in the attack here, I could just as well say, okay, I'm done. I'm just keeping these cards, and then any played cards will simply be matched and then discarded. Now, if this player did not have this card on their hands or didn't want to play anything anymore, maybe they passed, then this player could still continue. And let's just say, so this player played this card, defending player played that card, this player played this card, defending player passed. These two cards are still going to be blocked by this card, so now this player could play this card in attack as well. And then this means that the green power Terra is unblocked. Now, if that happens, then the defending player will suffer, and they will suffer an amount of cards equal to the undefended power. In this case, it's just the one card, because I could have played this card as well, but that would also just be blocked by this card, so that was pointless. So that means one power got through, and then I get to put the top card from my drawing deck into the opponent's despair pile. So it really pays to know what is on top of your deck, and you can't look at it. So you take the top card and you put it in the opponent's despair pile, and they simply hang on to it until the active player whose despair pile that is, so this player, decides to resolve that at the start of their turn. Now, I'm pretty sure that this is a Cosmos card because I didn't have much else in there, and it is. So you need to know what you're putting there, or otherwise it's pretty much a press your luck kind of mechanism on when to resolve that despair pile. So then after the attack phase, like I said, all of the played cards are discarded. This also goes for the defending player, puts those cards in their discard pile. And just like during the buy phase, I then get to decide whether I want to hold on to any cards still left in my hand or simply discard them. So maybe I want to discard this card as well. I've got no more cards in my hand, and my hand limit is 5, so I get to draw back up to 5, except when I actually dealt damage. So if the opponent suffered and I had to put cards from my draw deck into their despair pile, then I draw back up to 5 minus the number of cards that I put in their despair pile. So if I put 1 card in their despair pile, I draw back up to 4. If I put 2 there, I draw back up to 3, etc. And drawing back up to your hand is called the refresh phase. So after you've done all that, your turn is over and play continues with the player on your left. So then the next player's turn is up, and they can also decide whether or not they want to resolve the despair cards in their player to their left's despair pile. They can buy cards, at which point they refill the market, and then either gain cards, play cards, choose to play those cards' effects or not, possibly discard cards, or attack if they want to and see if the player to their left can defend or not, and if they get some points through, then they suffer, etc. And then draw back up to 5 minus any despair cards that they manage to get through. And like I said, if at any point while resolving a despair pile that has 5 weakness in total of all of those cards, then that player gains 1 dominance, and if you decide to only play up to 1, then that player wins. Otherwise, you just keep playing until you have 2 or possibly even 3 dominance, and that player is the winner of the game. Finally, the Luudos Studio's website also has rules online for a solo play variant where you play against a champion, an AI. And the second edition of the game, which is currently on Kickstarter, will also have rules for a fully cooperative game against an AI. And those are all the rules. You can also find the rules online by scanning this QR code, and you'll have the latest rules available. The rulebook is a living document, so it will get updated once in a while. But that's everything you need to know, so let's go to my final thoughts. So my final thoughts on Sins, the deck building game by Luudos Studio. Let me start with the components. So the cards are of a good thickness. As you can see, they have a good quality. They have a nice sound to them, and they are printed really well. The print on them is very clear and easy to read. They come in simple tuck boxes, and Season 1 came, if you pledged for it, in a storage box. Now Season 2 will have a new storage solution, and while this box could store up to 9 decks, these separate decks won't be available anymore. You buy them in sets of 3 right now. So this set is one set you buy in a smaller storage box that holds these 3 tuck boxes, and then there's a second box with 3 new Sins, and there will be additional boxes as well with all of these new packs. So for Season 1 backers, sadly, this box has basically become obsolete. It's no longer available. So that's a bit of a bummer for Season 1 original backers, but they will get a discount if they return for the second season, which is on Kickstarter right now. Season 1 also did not come with a physical rulebook, but instead there is a living document that you can find online where the developer will update the rulebook if necessary. But the second edition of the game will come with a latest printed version of the rulebook in all of the packs. Season 1 also came with optional play mats that you can see if you check out my unboxing video, if you click the eye in the corner of this video. And Season 2 will have new play mats as well, which are smaller and fit into the individual storage boxes that hold 3 of these decks. So there have been quite a few changes between the first and the second edition, and the component quality has only improved. Next is the artwork. I love the artwork of this game. It's really good. I like the panorama that you have on these Cosmos cards, but I really love the art on the cards. And I also got the art book, which you can also see in my unboxing, which has larger prints of all of these cards from, I believe, the first 2 expansions. And they're really good, nice, colorful and dark artwork with all of these demons and these monsters. It looks really nice, and that's something that certainly drew me into the game. The art is meant for a mature audience, especially dealing with, the 7 sins, especially with lust, of course, which has very provocative artwork. So this isn't a very family-friendly theme, but there is, however, a re-theme of the game also available, which is called Gears, which is about fantasy, steampunk, and it doesn't have the 5 different powers, but 3, and some more obvious combinations of cards. So that might be a nice alternative for families if you don't particularly like the provocative artwork of these. So that brings me to the theme itself. I personally really like the theme. I think the 7 sins idea is really cool. And like I said, the art is amazing for them. However, I do feel that the theme is very loosely connected to the gameplay itself. Now, each sin plays differently. You have in each deck, you've got all 7 sins, and each sin has 2 different cards, and thematically they do make sense, or at least their abilities make sense. So Wrath is very aggressive and thins out your deck and destroys cards. And then there's Greed, making acquiring cards cheaper. You get more for less. And there's Lust that makes you look in places you shouldn't look, like in your discard pile or on the top of your draw pile or in your despair pile. So, and then, all of these themes have their own kind of thematic ability. So that makes sense. But in the game itself, what does it mean? What is the player? Are we like gods battling each other using these sins? Are we demons or angels? That's not very clear right now. So the theme feels a little bit disconnected from the actual gameplay, I think. I mean, in the five powers and their names, what does that mean? You know, like the Ignis and the Omnis and what have you. And I mean, they're explained. There are some cards in these decks that explain what that means, but does it really mean anything? Gameplay wise, it really doesn't. And to be honest, I quickly forgot all of those names and I just call them, you know, orange and purple and blue and green and white. And you'll probably be doing that real soon as well, because nobody's going to call them, I'm going to play this Ignis card to purchase that card, which has two Ignis, and I'm going to use this Omnis for the remaining cost. I mean, that's just not going to happen. So in the end, I like the idea, and I really like in the art that resulted from that idea. And I like the fact that they do have abilities that kind of relate to those seven sins, but ultimately the theme does feel a little bit disconnected from what you're actually doing. So that brings me to the gameplay. So each of these battle packs, as they call them, do have all the seven sins, and every sin has two different cards with different abilities, and all of these decks will have new cards with new abilities, and you can mix and match them up, so that adds to a lot of gameplay, which is really cool. And with one of these packs, you can play with 2 players. And if you add a second pack, you can play up to 4 players. And with a third pack, you can play up to 6 players. So you can make this game as big as you want and mix those cards up, like I said. So it does keep the gameplay fresh. Gameplay is relatively fast. Of course, with more players, it's going to take longer because every player needs to take their turn. So, you know, if you're playing this with 6 players, it's going to take a while before it's your turn again. So again, that's another reason why I think this is mostly a 2-player game. You know, it's possible to play with multiple players, but, you know, it feels kind of counterintuitive to be attacking other players besides the one to your left, because that's where you're going to resolve your despair and gain dominance, winning the game. Now, because the game has multiple battle packs, and these are just 3, there's gonna be 3 more, and then there's gonna be the 7th sin as well, and there's also gonna be the 3 celestial power, whatever it's called, add-on packs. So there's going to be a lot of cards that you can mix in with this. So there's plenty of replayability and variety in the cards, which I love and I applaud, but it comes with a downside. Now, because this game isn't really very intuitive, the rules are simple and the rules are very short and is easy to read through and to learn and to teach. I initially had trouble remembering all of the terms, all the terminology, especially the power and the weakness. Because on this card, you have your power at the bottom, which is just an icon in a color. You have the weakness, which is, again, icons in color in the middle of the card. And you have some words. You have like gluttony, beast, or pride, undead. What does that mean? Well, you know that this belongs to the gluttony sin and this to the pride sin. Fine. And there's might be some skills that relate to those cards. Okay, fine. And the ability, okay, it's clear what it says on the card, but for some reason I had trouble remembering it because it uses all of these terms that are in the card, and you constantly need to remind, okay, well, the despair deck, that's where you put your cards if you manage to attack someone successfully. So that's where you want as much of these in the middle, so that's the weakness, as possible. Because if you have 5 weakness in the despair pile, then you can resolve that at the start of your turn of the player on your left, and that will get you a dominance point. And all these terms, they make it really hard for me to remember everything. And it doesn't even explain it on the card. It just has a dot here in a color and dots in a color over there and the ability, and that's it really. So the terms, I mean, strength or power, this is called power. That's pretty straightforward. That's your buying power, sure, or your attacking power. Makes sense. But the weakness, that's the cost of the card, It's also your defense, which a word, like weakness doesn't really feel like it's your defense. And it's also the what you need in your despair pile. I don't know. It just didn't click until a very long time. I had to play this several times before it finally kind of stuck into my mind that, what this and this means. And I kind of wish they used clearer terms and actually put it on the card, and maybe even put it in the top of the card, because you're holding your cards like this and you can't read what's on this card if it's behind the other one. You're looking at your cards and you're constantly going, oh yeah, this does this and this does that. And that's just, it's annoying. And that's one of the reasons why, there is a lot of variation in the game and a lot of replayability. It makes it really hard, because every time you get new cards, you're thinking, oh, what does this do again? And what did I need that for? And when should I trigger this ability? And like I said, it gave me analysis paralysis. And for a deck builder, I really don't want that to happen. I mean, in a game like Dominion, you're looking at the card and you're saying, well, this is what the card costs. This is money, this is attack power, and this is his ability, and that's it. And you can see all of that in an instance. And for some reason with this game, it took a lot longer for me to grasp. So maybe that's just me, but for me, all of that and the terminology made the game feel more complex than it actually is or needs to be. Now, I do welcome the fact that, there's a lot of variety and there's new packs and stuff that you can add to the game to keep the game fresh. So it kind of feels like if you can't get this to click, and, you have trouble with the terms and with the rules and with, remembering what all the cards do, you probably won't do well with this game, which makes you not play the game that much, which makes you forget the rules, etc. And then you'll just, leave it on the shelf or get rid of it. While on the other hand, if you do like the game and it clicks and you remember everything and it makes sense to you, you'll like it a lot more, you'll play it a lot more, and the rules will stick. So it feels like this is a game that you'll either love or just hate. There's no middle ground here, in my opinion. So, is the game any good? Well, yes. Yes, it is. The rules are good. I like what this game is trying to do. I think there's a lot of depth here, a lot of strategy, a lot of choices. There's some press your luck. There's some, decisions and some puzzly decisions that you need to make. Am I going to attack? Am I going to keep this card for defense? Am I going to buy a card? Which card to buy? When do I want to trigger this effect? Should I keep on, holding on to this card in case I get attacked, and then play it in defense and trigger that ability, which makes me manipulate my deck or whatever? There's a lot of choices here. So in its essence, this is a really deep and good strategic game, but it has to click with you. So in all honesty, I would recommend trying to find some gameplay videos before deciding if this game is for you. And you can also play it online. I've played it with the designer over Tabletop Simulator, which was a lot of fun, so that is entirely possible. Now, normally I also touch on the replayability of the game, but I feel like I already mentioned that there is a lot of replayability here, especially if you go all in and get all the decks and the add-ons and everything. There will be a lot of cards that you can mix into the game, especially if you're just playing two-player games mostly, which I kind of feel like I would be doing. Then you have tons of content and replayability to mix up the game and keep it fresh. Now, lastly, I do need to mention that this game is language dependent because of the text of the abilities on the card, so you do need to have a good grasp of the English language to be able to play this. So that's it. I'd like to thank Luudos Studios for sending over this box for me to review. I appreciate that a lot. And if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. And please also consider becoming a Patreon saint and supporting my channel by visiting my Patreon page by clicking the link in the description below or the Patreon icon at the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time on Board Game Heaven.